Ah, the humidity here is disgusting. Welcome to the 17th century, interns. Try not to die of yellow fever. HR absolutely hates the paperwork. And I am not paying for your repatriation. Right now, somewhere on your kitchen counter or at a table in your local cafe, there is an unremarkable sugar bowl. Look at it. Inside lies a substance that we have been conditioned to take entirely for granted. It is cheap calories, just background noise in your morning espresso. But let's be clinically honest about what it actually is. It is a highly engineered biological hack, a dopamine trigger so powerful that entire global supply chains were forged just to keep your brain flooded with it. If you could time travel a couple of centuries into the past and show that full sugar bowl to a European monarch, they would look at you with absolute awe and terror. It would be as if you had casually dumped a handful of large, flawless diamonds onto the table. In textbooks, they tell you that world history was driven by grand philosophical ideas, religious fervor, and the noble struggle for territory. Forget that garbage. Narratives are for children. Balance sheets are for adults. And the ledger of human history is always soaked in blood. The most brutal, massive, and absolutely cynical reorganization of the entire planet did not happen because of shiny metal or political ideology. It happened because of the human brain's overwhelming physiological addiction to sweetness. Behind this innocent, everyday product lies a dark, terrifyingly calculated history. This is the story of how a single consumer habit birthed the world's first global corporate network, turned human beings into expendable inventory with accounting precision, and laid the bloody foundation of modern financial capitalism. Grab your calculators. We are going down into the green hell. To understand the sheer scale of this historical madness, we must forget our modern world, where sweetness is sold on every corner in plastic wrappers. Medieval Europe was a harsh, bland, and incredibly bitter place. The food was heavily salted to prevent rotting or masked with sharp, pungent herbs. For the average peasant, and frankly, even for a noble lord, the only sweet things naturally available were fruits and honey. And honey was fiercely guarded, heavily taxed, and notoriously expensive. Sugar, or sweet salt, as the Crusaders called it, was an absolute anomaly. It was brought in microscopic batches along the dusty routes of the Silk Road. It was prescribed in apothecaries by the gram as a rare, miraculous medicine for chest pains or fevers. A lump of sugar was the ultimate, undisputed status symbol. If you could afford to serve your royal guests a marzipan sculpture or a dish sprinkled with sugar, you were projecting your geopolitical power far louder than if you had simply worn a heavier crown or built a taller castle. Venetian merchants, history's greatest and most ruthless middlemen, understood this first. They monopolized this trade, selling the white powder at insane profit margins that would make modern tech giants look like a children's lemonade stand. But sugar had a fundamental, insurmountable problem. Unlike gold, which you can simply dig out of the ground or steal from a neighbor, sugar has to be grown. And sugarcane is an incredibly demanding prima donna of the plant world. It needs the tropics. It needs massive, uninterrupted amounts of water. And it requires land completely free of frost. Europe, with its gloomy, freezing winters, was physically incapable of producing its own ultimate status symbol. So, when European monarchs began financing suicidal naval expeditions to find new routes to India, they were not just looking for spices and gold. They were desperately looking for independent sources of sweetness to break the Venetian monopoly. The discovery of the New World initially brought the Spanish Empire mountains of gold and silver. But the colonizers quickly realized a harsh economic truth. Mines eventually run dry. Metal is finite. But the untouched, wildly fertile soils of the Caribbean islands and the coast of Brazil, that was a renewable, scalable asset. And the climate there was absolutely perfect for sugarcane. It seemed like the ultimate, flawless business solution. Plant the islands, harvest the crop, ship it to Paris or London, and bathe in unimaginable luxury. But this arrogant fantasy immediately crashed into brutal logistical reality. Growing sugarcane is not like picking apples in a pleasant autumn orchard. It is one of the most grueling, destructive forms of physical labor ever known to humanity. The stalks are thick, heavy, and fibrous. The leaves are razor sharp. The tropical sun is merciless, and the fields are infested with disease-carrying insects. And worse, once the cane is cut, the clock starts ticking. The sap inside begins to ferment and spoil. It must be crushed and boiled immediately. This meant you couldn't just operate a simple farm. You needed an industrial factory right next to the field, with massive iron gears and boiling copper vats, operating around the clock in suffocating heat. European peasants absolutely refused to do this work, no matter the wage. Indigenous populations died rapidly from European diseases or simply escaped into the familiar, impenetrable jungle. The entire lucrative sugar enterprise was on the brink of total collapse because of a severe labor deficit. And this is exactly where the cold, calculating logic of the balance sheet took over. If you cannot hire labor and you cannot find labor locally, you must import labor, not as human employees, but as standardized capital equipment. The transatlantic slave trade was not born out of chaotic, mindless cruelty. That is the most terrifying part of this audit. It was born out of a desperate need for industrial efficiency. African slaves were purchased, transported, and worked to death on sugar plantations with the exact same accounting precision that a modern logistics company uses to track delivery trucks and warehouse inventory. Plantation owners literally calculated exactly how many calories a slave needed to survive the 6-month harvest season. They calculated the depreciation rate of a human life. It was mathematically cheaper to work a person to death in 7 years and buy a fresh replacement than it was to provide adequate food, shelter, and rest. Human life was literally monetized to satisfy a pathetic biological craving for sweet tea and pastries. But the financial horror doesn't stop in the blood-soaked fields. The immense capital required to buy land, build massive boiling houses, and purchase human inventory was way too much for any single monarch or merchant to risk. Ships sank in hurricanes, slaves rebelled, crops failed. The financial risks were astronomical. To solve this, the brilliant, sociopathic minds of Europe invented entirely new financial instruments. They created joint stock companies, allowing hundreds of wealthy investors to share the risk and the massive profits of the sugar trade. They created complex insurance policies specifically to underwrite the slave ships. If a ship went down, the investors didn't lose their shirts because the human cargo was insured as property. The entire concept of credit, futures contracts, and modern banking expanded massively just to keep the global sugar supply chain flowing. Wall Street and the modern banking system owe a massive, unpayable debt to the sugar rush. The financial architecture we use today to trade stocks, buy houses, and run tech startups was forged in the fiery furnaces of Caribbean boiling houses. This history leaves a deep, highly unpleasant aftertaste. When we think of slavery, we like to imagine ancient tyrants building stone monuments. But the true industrialization of cruelty happened in the age of rationalism and free trade. It was built on cold, pragmatic calculation to satisfy exploding consumer demand. The most catastrophic horrors in history are rarely created by insane madmen screaming from balconies. They are created by highly rational, well-educated people sitting in quiet offices who simply want what they desire at the highest possible profit margin. Audit closed. Smash that like button unless you want to be reassigned to an 18th century boiler room without health insurance. And now head down to the comments. Tell me, what product could you not give up today, even if you knew its real bloody price? Try to justify your addiction to me. Subscribe to the channel. Your attention is the only liquid asset keeping you on the Bureau's payroll. And you should subscribe, because next time we are flying to ancient Egypt. We will prove that the pyramids are not monuments, but giant investment black holes. We will audit the ancient industry of death and find out how the mummy cult drained the country's entire working capital, turning gold into dead, illiquid assets.
Oh!